The one. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's 5:02 p.m. Will you please join me for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, at this time, we're going to turn it over to Mr. Whitaker.
Well, actually,
You're going to turn it over to
You
Dr.
turn it
Silver.
over to me to start.
All right.
Oh, there's a microphone problem. It worked. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is really to do a complete overview of the budget, because we need to adopt the board needs to adopt the budget at the April 12th meeting to meet all the timelines moving forward for the budget vote and notice provisions, then give us enough time to do the budget newsletter and get all that stuff done. So Bob's going to walk you through the entire budget, but what we're really looking at is what's the frame of the budget. Because budget, there we go. Because budgets are not one-year events. They're really what you do. The decisions you make this year affect next year and the year after and the year after that. And so we're really trying to look at this as part of a framework moving forward. Bob talked several weeks ago about establishing a new capital reserve fund. And that's part of the strategy of looking at what the issues are we have moving forward. So I'll talk a little bit about what enrollment changes and attrition of staff. Then Bob will take over pretty much, talk about budget overview, a contingent budget, reserves and the future of the tax cap, and then just Q&A. And then at the end, Bob will spend a little bit of time talking about the auditor's RFP. So the key to the you hold the thing in the right direction, it really works. So the keys to this budget, as far as I'm concerned, are what's happening with our enrollment moving forward, the attrition of staff, how we can take advantage of that. I'm looking at making up the losses in revenue from the negative tax cap last year, just getting us back to where we were. The new capital reserve and how that fits in planning, and the other pieces we need to be mindful of moving forward. Oh, let me stay here for a second. One of the things that I'm concerned about as we move forward is with the foundation aid, what happens with the state. Because the governor's made a commitment to fully fund the foundation aid over 2 years. We got half of it this year. It was $320,000. Next year we'll get another $320,000, and after that, nobody knows what's going to happen. And part of the history of school aid is the funding formulas have changed over time, and the arguments have changed over time. Initially, the initial arguments about aid for schools goes back to the 60s. It was all about equality. And so we still see pieces of that in the state formulas, in the per head counts for textbook aid and computer aid and library aid. So you have X number of kids, each kid gets $12 for a textbook a year, you add that all together, that's your textbook aid. So everyone got equal amounts. Then it turned to equity. And that's when states put in all the formulas weighted for poverty issues and free and reduced lunch, and Title I came into being to address some of those equity issues. For the last 10 years, the arguments have been about adequacy. Is the funding that schools have adequate to deliver a quality education to students? And that's a very interesting question. And what was it called? The Campaign for Fiscal Equity that brought the lawsuit against the state about 10 or 12 years ago. That it was an adequacy argument. Yes, the state was providing a lot of money, but they were providing a lot of money to wealthy districts that were more than adequate educationally, but not enough money to poorer districts to make up the difference. And that was the court case they won, and then there was the Great Recession, and the state backed away from fully funding the formula that the courts ordered, and that's why the governor fulfilling the foundation aid is working with a formula that's probably 15 years old at this point, and doesn't match what current needs are. And definitions of adequacy are really interesting because they're really academic. They look at, there's several different ways they do it, but they look at multiple successful schools and say how much are they spending per kid, look at school districts that are less successful, and then try to figure out how the funding works, funding streams work for all of that. But no one knows what's going to happen not next year for aid, but the year after for fiscal year 25. And for us, that's a double whammy because that's the same year we lose the bond, the construction aid, because the bond falls away. And so we'll be looking at two holes to dig out of at that point. And at NISCUS, there was a lot of conversation about what the state might do, but nobody really knows. They're pretty flush with money now, so they can say all kinds of nice things. But when push comes to shove, we don't really know what that means. And for us, as our enrollment drops and our capital project aid drops, we have to figure out how to make up the difference. The tax cap puts a real burden. Each 1% of tax increase yields us about a little over $200,000. 1% increase in the budget costs us about $600,000, $300,000. So right away there's a mismatch, and you have to look at what's going to change to make the difference. So this is looking at our enrollment data, and I know it's a little bit smaller than I like, but if you go back to 2016-17, we had over 1,000 kids in the district, 1,044 kids. This year on Beds Day, we had 879 kids in the district. So we've lost. The important bit about all this is the little box down in the lower right-hand corner. We have 183 fewer kids this year than we did 6 years ago. We had 61 fewer kids than last year, and 18 fewer kids than this past October. So, and most of those losses are in the elementary school. They have 117 less kids than they did 6 years ago, and the staffing levels have stayed virtually the same. The high school actually had a net gain of about 11 kids this year. Again, I'm using Beds Day data, not current data, because that's constant. We also have 18 or 19 people leaving the district this year, either through retirement or moves, just regular resignations, or people we're not recommending for renewal. And so it's a pretty healthy list: 2 or 3 aides, 2 elementary classroom teachers, 3 special education teachers, a guidance counselor, an AIS teacher, 2 math teachers at the secondary school, a tech ed teacher, a health PE teacher, 2 social workers, school nurse, and 2 secretaries. So our conversation administratively has been, how can we lose staff numbers through attrition without firing anybody or letting anybody go? So this is what happens when you convert PowerPoint slides into Google Slides. You get attritio and N. So what we're proposing is eliminating 6 positions: 2 elementary classroom positions, 1 elementary special ed position, 1 elementary social worker, elementary AIS, and 1 guidance secretary, and filling all the other positions that are up there. When you look at the what that classroom, the loss of 2 classroom positions does in terms of enrollment, the yellow boxes are Jen's and my recommendation for staffing levels. And you can see that even with losing two teaching sections, 2 classroom sections. At kindergarten, you're still at 1 to 13. First grade, you're still at 1 to 15. Second grade, 1 to 17. Third grade, 1 to 15. Fourth grade, 1 to 18. Fifth grade is the big one at 1 to 21. And sixth grade is 1 to 17. So our class sizes are still very small by both local and national standards. And I think that would allow us to maintain the quality of instruction that we have. And that's Bob's thing. So does anyone have any questions about enrollment or anything like that?
Can you go back to the positions you're looking
So, guidance secretary,
Yes. There are 2 pieces with that. One is Dave thinks guidance secretaries are rolling. There are times of the year where they're enormously busy and times of the year where they're not. So college application time, recommendation time, ends of quarters, that's when they're really busy. So we also feel that we're adding an additional secretary to this site, the shared position between IT and buildings and grounds. And so if there needs to be extra support, we have ways of doing that. And the other thing we're doing is the student activities accounts have been managed by Lynn in the guidance office for years. She's retiring. And so we're going to move that function over into, we're doing it as stipend. And I can't remember. Oh. You have 2 going down to 1.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then as far as the social worker, I mean, we kind of fought hard to add social workers into the budget in the past. So are we moving a social worker? We're reducing a social worker?
We're reducing 1 social worker. So the total clinical staff will be reduced by 1. And again, with fewer numbers and having people do some things a little bit differently, we think we can handle the needs of the kids.
So the social worker, how many social workers do we have now in
2.
the secondary? So we have 2.
We have
So
1 at each level.
So then we'll have 1 at each level, or we'll just be down to 1.
We'll have 1 K-12.
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 Yeah.
I mean, given at a time where we need more mental health and wellness.
Jen, you want to?
So after reviewing all of the way that the school year went, and certainly with all of the new initiatives that we have started rolling out, especially with the new ruler program, with a lot of the teachers being able to incorporate some of the social emotional learning within their daily routines in the classroom. I do feel as though having 1 social worker that could be shared K to 12 is appropriate. Certainly it is not limiting our students or their access in any way. What we have now, which we did not have in the past, was the school counselor role. So, historically when I started here at Tri-Valley, there was no school counselors here. It was a state mandate that we ended up getting one. She is fantastic, and the amount of student interactions that she's able to have, I do not feel as though this will have a negative impact on our students. And in addition, of course, we do, have our school psychologist who also is able to absorb some of the other responsibilities and tasks, including any kind of IEP counseling that is necessary. So I am more than comfortable with the idea of going ahead down to 1, and if need be, I could always tap into the one that is shared with the secondary school.
So we have 1 school counselor. Was it a psychologist, right? There's 1, or is there 2 up there? There's 3. Okay.
So just to be clear, the elementary school, I have one school psychologist.
Uh-huh.
I have one school counselor.
Thank you.
And this would be looking to eliminate that one elementary social worker who I currently have as part of my clinical team for the elementary school.
One of the other psychologists is
Okay.
Yes. So,
And often I feel like your psychologists and your social workers are targeting your special ed population and kids in crisis and those kids. But social workers can tend to work with a broader range of kids. So I just want to make sure like all of our kids are covered and good. Districts are, in Monticello, we have a social emotional wellness teacher that just does social emotional wellness with everybody. So I just want to make sure we're doing right.
And then as far as the guidance counselor, so we have 2 guidance counselors in the secondary school. We're going to go down to 1 guidance counselor? Or no? That's just, I wanted clarification on that too.
There's one vacancy in the guidance staff, but we'll fill that. We hope we'll fill that.
My concern is just COVID took a toll on these kids, and we relied. I think the board relied on having the additional social workers within the building. So that is, if you're comfortable and you're saying our kids are taken care of, and I'm okay.
And the same thing like AIS. Again, we've got a lot of gaps in learning, so do you not see a need to have that to help fill those gaps?
Just hold on to the mic, Jen.
We just want to make sure we're doing
I will pass, I promise. I think it's important to keep in mind our enrollment decrease. So as we're looking at this idea of going down classroom sections and this idea of, what are we doing with AIS? Well, the fact is our class numbers are going to go down. So when we're moving from one grade to the next, when you have 4 sections, as that class moves up, they need 4. But however, if you have a 3-section class coming up, you've got 4 teachers that they're going into, that leaves room for me to have the flexibility to reassign one of those sections of that grade. So what you're seeing here looks like we're losing, but in fact, we're just shifting. Okay. And we're making those appropriate adjustments for the decrease in enrollment that we have. And for, just for peace of mind, understand that I took this and I mapped this out, assigning teachers to each one of these grades with these sections and with these numbers. And everything that I have this year, such as AIS, I'm going to be having that again, which is reallocating staff who I don't need 4 sections of that particular grade. I've been able to really scout out certain teachers that I think would be appropriate to fill that AIS position where I don't need them on that grade level anymore because the numbers are low. Okay. Thank you, Bill.
Anything else? Are you ready for Bob? Okay, Robert.
Okay. A couple of things I just want to highlight that Bill brought up. If you look at the reduction of enrollment, I'm a percentage guy lots of times. That was close to 18% of our population has decreased in enrollment. So that number stands out. And I believe, hopefully, I've been able to present to you the future as it comes to revenue. A budget has to be paid for. So when we're looking at the potential of negative tax caps, not next year, but the following 3 years, how do we get there? Bill chronicled pretty well that our aid will not see large spikes. So I think we're trying to craft this budget to plan for the future. It's not a one-year plan. And we need to look at the future. Oh, as again, he's much better than I am, but the budget overview. This current year's budget's $35,171,263. The budget we're going to leave you with tonight for adoption would be $35,839,371. It represents a 1.9% increase over this year's budget. We also have to remember that 2021 and 1920, we kept everything flat, not knowing what the pandemic was going to do to us. And as we're not only Tri-Valley, but as every school is moving post-pandemic, you have to take a look at a lot of things. The outside variables that are coming into play for schools when it deals with revenue are something you have to pay attention to. We have some costs that are based on CPI. CPI is going to go through the roof this year, and probably for the next 2+ years. Also, with the world events going on, fuel, what costs a lot of money? So fuel is very volatile. There is no fuel bid right now. I was in a Zoom meeting last week. They're hoping to put a fuel bid out sometime in May. My colleagues and I are also looking at state contracts for fuel, but there will be an increase for fuel next year. There's no doubt about it. So as we're moving in that direction, once again, it's about planning for the future. So we got to pay for all these programs and all our students. Two things really critical for this year. We have a tax cap of over $700,000 this year, 3.57%. Bill and I both believe to ask our taxpayers to have their taxes increased by that much is not fair to them. But we do believe it's fair to ask to make up the difference that we lost last year, $160,000. The 22-23 tax levy in dollars would be the same as the 19-20 school year, because 19 and 20 and 20 and 21 were flat. So, and knowing that next year our tax levy may be negative to the point of almost $600,000, we feel by establishing this baseline this year, that will help alleviate the potential pain. The other area I want to look at, and I believe, hopefully, I forgot to mention this, I sent you all a packet with a lot of information, is a new way for revenue. Applied fund balance is what we apply. It's like, okay, at the end of the year, we're allowed 4% to keep in our coffers to start the next year, but we can apply so much of our fund balance towards next year's budget. You do not want that wavering all over the place. We try to maintain it fairly level, give or take $100,000, $200,000. In your packet there, I showed you two reserve funds that we have that state law and municipal law allow for those monies to be shifted out of those reserve funds to apply towards next year's budget. The workers' comp and the unemployment reserve. We have over $1 million between those two reserves. I have to, because the state doesn't have a budget, that's the aid we're expecting right now. So how do I make up the difference? My gap. My gap is down to $231,000 from almost $600,000, $700,000. So we're going to suggest that we're going to pencil in $231,935, probably from the workers' comp reserve, Workers' comp reserve is for catastrophic injuries. A catastrophic injury is now rated at $550,000. The good news is we're a member of a workers' comp consortium, Sullivan County with some other districts. I have a reserve up there as well that we can easily fund 4 catastrophic events between the 2 reserves. So pulling $230,000 out of that pool of money would not impact us dramatically. But what happens if we don't if we don't pass a budget? We have 2 options. We can revote. We can revote with the same dollar value, an increase in dollar value, or a decrease in dollar value. Or the board can adopt a contingency budget. A contingency budget for next year's calculations are mandated deducts, mostly equipment. And in the packet I sent you, there's a whole thing in there about the gray areas of contingent items. Conservatively, we look at $300,000, so that would bring our budget down. For my purpose here, I am very fortunate that our taxpayers here have always supported our budgets and supported our school. Try to be cognizant of their ability to pay. So, but this contingency budget is something we have to adopt. It'll be on the April 12th thing too. But you can see the difference is about $300,000. Well, it's $304,000. Okay, so now we'll get into a little bit of each of the components. The program component, which is the largest portion of our budget, has an increase of $668,000, 1.9%. We've reinstated a lot of our supplies and materials to pre-pandemic levels. Planning the last couple years, not knowing where money was, they were talking about a 20% reduction in aid. So we feel comfortable reinstating those supplies and materials dollars. We're anticipating up to an additional $400,000 in off-campus special education costs. That sounds like a tremendous amount of money, and it is. All of our facilities that we send our students to have increases coming. BOCES, our local BOCES, is going to range anywhere from 4 to 10% depending upon the program. Center for Discovery, Green Chimneys, Devereaux, Latham, so we have, there's money there, and we have to plan for that. We do have a new speech person on campus that we brought in this year. We're phasing in her salary over the next 2 years, and we're using the rescue plan monies for that. I'm also planning on using the rescue plan monies to help fund some of our transportation costs. Knowing that CPI, you look at our transportation budget, it's not going up a tremendous amount. Well, it is going up a lot. But this is part of the proper usage, I believe, of these funds, is to try to supplement stuff until stability returns. And another thing we noticed last year is in our recruitment of new staff, it's very competitive. And like most of us, most new staff was worried about how much they're going to make. To attract people with experience, to attract them to a rural area, sometimes we have to have higher salaries to start out. We really experienced that last year, and I anticipate we'll experience the same thing this year. The capital portion of the budget sees a decrease of a little over $13,000. But in there's some additional expenses to address some water system needs. Jesse and I have spoken for the past 3 years about a lot of issues. We've dealt with our lead, we've dealt with a lot of things, but our holding tank is hurting. We're making provisions for that. That money will be paid for out of the repair reserve fund. It's a one-time expense. We'll have enough money in there to fund that, but there are some expenses related to people that are going to design this and everything that are going to cost us. We have a little more money in there for some equipment. There's a couple pieces, one in particular equipment here that is really end of life. And that's not from, believe me, our crew here does everything they can to maintain everything. Sometimes things are just out of fixing anymore. We anticipate some electric savings this coming year because of the EPC project. But we also anticipate more expenses on the fuel side. Like I mentioned before, this is yet to be bid. And the real reason for this decrease, last year when I was presenting to you a budget, in the capital portion is our debt service. At that time, talking with our bond counsel, I put a number in that budget for the new bond that we were not going to take until July 1st. I had to be conservative, didn't want to underestimate it. So there was a decent savings there from year to year because what we actually realized as expense was quite a bit less than what we had budgeted for. On the administrative side, we have an increase of $127,000, 3.69%. We do have this particular component has a lot of confidential management people in there. We have anticipated, and they need to have new contracts. So we have some salary increases coming there. The big expense here, haven't committed 100% to it, but I'm close, is year one of leasing new copiers district-wide. A lot of our copiers are starting to have a lot of repair calls. The one upstairs by Lori Thayer, 3 of them up there, which were brand new, this is year 4, are starting, once they start having a lot of repair calls, you know it's time. And the leasing of these, I think, across the district is the time to get everybody up to snuff. There's an additional FTE in the admin office, and we're addressing the administrative clerical needs to meet additional workloads. One of the things I think we all see, we know teachers, we know principals, we know administrators, but so many people involved in all the work that assist us in getting stuff done, the workload has risen quite a bit. It's one of the reasons we talked about a shared position. So, and last year we addressed it going from 200 to 240 days for some of our clerical people. To get the daily work done, we sort of neglected that over the course of time. And we're really trying to address that to hopefully make sure these people stay sane. Now, I'm sure there must be some questions related to this.
You're recruiting staff. You talked about higher salaries. How are you going to do that? Are you going to hire them at a higher step than they're at? Are you going to do a higher incentive?
No, usually what happens, like with anything else, I mean, if we'll take any position. If a teacher applies, if a potential teacher or any employee, whether it be clerical teacher, comes here and they have 6, 8, 10, 15 years of experience, you are now attracting someone that will be effective right from the start. We had one in the elementary school this year. I mean, we went, elementary, classic case. Step 1. Well, step 18, 17. We had somebody show up, applied for one of our positions. And, so that's really what we have to do here. Because and the number of applicants has reduced quite a bit. So how do we attract? Dollars is usually the main thing.
So you're just talking about hiring experienced teachers at their current
Right.
step, not just hiring brand new staff.
Right.
Or higher steps.
Okay.
Because we have discretion, superintendent has discretion to just set the starting salary for all.
Whereas you may have
Contract,
thought,
so.
like most positions, I can get away with hiring somebody on, I'm losing somebody who's been here 25 or 30 years, so I can get somebody on step 4 or 5. Now we're seeing that step 10 to 12 may be more in the range, especially for experience. Other questions?
Do you have any questions?
So, let's see if we can do this. So as we leave here in a little bit, we're presenting you with a dollar value of $35,839,371 to adopt at the April board meeting to put out for our voters. So we have time, but if there's other questions, I want to thank everybody. You heard how much input our administrators had. They really looked at our student needs, how we cover, and they do realize that, yeah, we have 18% less students than we did 6 years ago. And if they feel that they can cover and meet our student needs with what we proposed here, I, for one, would never question them.
And we know you always try to do best by the taxpayer, so trust your.
I mean, it's a substantial decrease in student population. Who would have thought? I never would have thought that our percentage would.
Well, if you look at a larger level, the state of New York has a population decrease of over 300,000 people. Less money, less people spending money in the sales tax area. So that state aid, which Bill chronicled pretty well, but you know, if you look at the history of state aid in New York as an overall thing, it's quite an escalation. It's hard to escalate that when you have less people in here. And you know, the world is volatile. It will be volatile, you know. From my take, the monies that the federal government released almost has some devil in it because of false sense of security. They couldn't have planned for what took place in Ukraine. They could not plan for certain things. So I think the one thing that I feel pretty comfortable working with Dr. Silver is that we have looked at the future and try to maintain the level of educational programming that we have here.
And we'll get you copies. I know Bob's sent a lot of backup material. I'll get you a copy of the PowerPoint too.
I
so you have
appreciate that.
I'll send that out to you tomorrow.
So the RFP, you're gonna fill that portion of the.
Ready to roll.
Okay.
Okay, I had sent to the audit committee, but tonight I gave you all a copy of the results of the RFP. Nugent Hausler has been our external auditor for the past 5 years. You're supposed to go out for an RFP and at least examine and look into possibly changing who does your services. This particular RFP, 3 other districts and us worked through Sullivan County BOCES to conduct this RFP. It came back pretty quickly. We sent out over 27 inquiries across the region for people that are known, you know, they do this type of work. Tri-Valley received 3 bids. I don't know what the other schools received because it was all bid individually. In my letter to the audit committee, I recommended awarding this to Nugent and Hausler. And it's a little selfish. In my time here, Justin and his crew have been, not the days that they come and do actual auditing, their responsiveness to our questions, they're constantly giving us updates as to things that we may need to know about that affect our processes. Their ability to listen to some off-the-wall thinking by somebody that's holding a microphone and talk through things, they're readily available to us at all times. So to me, it wasn't a dollars and cents, and it's just like there is a comfort level there. But the main thing is, when we developed this RFP, if you looked at it, the single audit, which is basically, they audit one of the grants every year, and the extra classroom audit. You're supposed, the directions behind this were our general audit, three line items. Well, only Nugent and Hausler gave us the 3 line items. And if you read this carefully, the other 2 bids do not mention how much they might charge. And I understand why, because each school district's a little different and they're not quite sure. But if you just look at the base, the general purpose, Nugent and Hausler is the least expensive of them. So I know the audit committee has sat in with Justin. He's presented to the board. Like I said, I think Dr. Silver is in concurrence that they're a good choice for us. I know he used them in Liberty also, not the same auditors, but the same company. So I present this to you that we need to award this bid either April 12th, no later than April 26th, but I'd like to do it on April 12th because it's a very simple line item.
Not to get picky about terminology, but these are not bids, they're proposals
Right,
for professional services.
Right.
So you don't have to take the lowest offer you can take. Take the service you want.
That was my question.
Where is RBT at? I have not heard of it.
they're somewhere over in Dutchess or Putnam, I think.
Newburgh area.
Yeah.
And Cooper and Arias, what do they do?
They had done our internal audit. We will revisit that sometime next year. Because of New York State regulations, any school district with less than 1,500 students is not required to do an internal audit. The internal audit is more of a risk assessment than actual numbers, but they had done our internal audit.
So we would want internal, external.
I would, because the one thing I really liked about Cooper and that wasn't Cooper and Arias, by the way. I can't remember. It's Washits and Bacharach, or I forget their names now. That's what they do. They are risk assessment. That's one of the specialty areas that they work in. They don't do external audits. Most auditors would tell you that this dollars and cents here, they do it because somebody has to do it. It's not a big money maker for them. Their auditing of large corporations and everything is where their money comes from.
Do we have the internal audit budgeted in this budget?
Yes.
Or is it not?
Any other questions on the RFP for the audit?
No, I would put it on
Okay.
because it's a quick
Yeah,
agenda.
it's, okay. Anything else?
No, any questions?
Okay, Aaron, now I might be screwed. Yeah.
Reserves.
I touched base on the reserves a little bit on accessing them to assist in your paying for next year's budget. But the other reserve plan that I introduced it, I think January or February, was as we get towards the end of this school year, is that we need to develop a policy or a plan on paper about our reserves. I've got it 80% done. I know you guys are a little bit busy. So as you're moving forward with the superintendent search and everything else that's going on, when we get into May, we'll probably have a discussion about that. It's basically part philosophy, part understanding what you can and can't do, and part establishing it in a written document. It doesn't have to be what you would call a policy per se as part of your policy committee. It's more of a plan that the board sees, and then annually we would update it, give you updates on what's going on there, because there's a lot of money in our reserves. Bill mentioned earlier the establishment, we're asking the voters to establish a new capital reserve fund. That's important, and that's a big thing that we have to look at as we get ready for this year's voting. We've also been in discussion with our lawyers and related to some tax cert issues. So I want to make sure that this board and the future boards that we talk about it, but we really don't have maybe a complete understanding of what a reserve fund is and what you can do. That document I left you in your packets there, it has all the reserve funds and it mentions them. But there's a lot more to that than just the definitions.
I agree with that. When you're coming new, you know, several years. I agree. So I just have two questions. If we wanted to add something into our line item budget, like the super eval that we spoke about, what do I do? Just send you this and say, hey, you know, this is something we're looking to add into our budget for next year?
So, look, yes. I mean, you mentioned it
But
to
I just
me.
want to make sure that it's included within our line item.
Right.
Yep.
Yes, you know, it's part of the planning. You know, budgeting in January, February, and March is not an exact science. Paying for stuff July through is a more exact science, but you know, it's where we go. But yeah, that's fine. And I actually could say that dollar value would not impact our budget, what I presented to you tonight.
Yeah, the state of Connecticut doesn't mention the word budget anywhere in the statute. They talk about estimates of expenditure. That's really what we're doing.
Words, play with words. Is it?
I like to play with words.
So we had spoken about in the past, the varsity jackets have been purchased for students who won sectionals or won states, and we were hoping we could do that for our students this year that have achieved that.
And it wouldn't be specific to athletics. It would also include the arts, kids that excel in NISBA or All-State or whatnot. But you look around and, you know, we need some pride. And you can purchase them now and they're quite expensive. And it's unfortunate because I think a lot of kids would wear them. And we have a lot of tremendous athletes and students here that they deserve to get a token from our school to say thank you, congratulations, well done. So if it's something that we can look into, they're costly, but you're talking about students that compete at a higher level, or students in the secondary school that achieve greatness through the arts. And
Talk to Jason, Dave, and Evan, and figure out.
And then try to do it. Obviously, our seniors who have achieved that are ending soon, so get that for them. Right. Right.
they're not gonna be the old red silk jackets, but they'll be probably the blue with the white. But it's really a token of appreciation. As an alumni, you pass it on to your children, and it was nice. I think Mrs. Hartman or who had it on it competition. Bethany Hamilton had her old school coat on, jumping around the gym. So it would be, I would appreciate it, and I think the kids would greatly appreciate being recognized for achievement. Comments in regards to the budget? So the only item that you really need on the agenda on the 12th would be the RFP proposal, the discussion and approval of the budget to move forward on the 3rd, right? Larger meeting, or we don't need to discuss the budget?
Budget hearings May 3rd.
May 3rd.
May 3rd, but the board has to adopt the
On
budget.
the 12th.
Right.
So there's nothing else that needs to be added to the agenda other than this RFP.
I don't know,
related
because
to
I
it.
haven't built the agenda yet.
Okay.
I'd
Well, we're
venture to
trying to
say
keep
that
it
there'll
simple.
be,
Keeping it
there'll
simple,
be
keep it
consent
tight.
agenda items.
Right. Just because it's National Honor Society, we're keeping the board meeting. We're going to try to keep it as streamlined as possible so we can get up to the auditorium and support our kids. So that's why I'm just asking that it short and sweet if possible.
I'm just trying to sneak a lot of stuff.
Right.
No presentations then.
Yeah.
No.
But that's it. That's all I have. Any other concerns?
It went to BOE, everybody should have gotten basically a packet that had a lot of information. No, I think it was yesterday.
I don't think so.
Well, Aaron, you told me it went to them. If I sent you that, I shared all my documents with you in the drive. How would they see that? It's not an email.
No, we don't have it.
I'll tell you what, tomorrow morning we'll do it the old-fashioned way. We'll send
Shared
you
with me.
separate files via email that you can just look at, print out if you want.
No,
No.
not shared with me either.
That's
No,
my
because
fault. I
usually you'll get an
apologize.
email notification that there's something that was just shared
Right.
with you. In the
Well, you know,
drive.
because I share a lot with.
That's
Oh.
all right.
So BOE, my fault.
We're just one
There's,
BOE.
you know,
Just one
BOE,
BOE.
BOE, you know, okay.
That's fine.
Sorry about that.
All right.
And
so-
when you get the documents, if you have any other questions, just shoot us emails and we'll respond.
Right, but the PowerPoint, is,
Get right to
yeah.
you.
All right, so is that it? I need a motion and a second. Motion, Aaron. Second, Randy. Proceed to vote. It is 5:54 p.m. and that concludes the workshop.